10 years ago, my ex-husband Greg hurled cruel words that still linger in my mind. Women her age have more to offer. Talking to an older woman like you is just embarrassing. Marrying Greg was a mistake. I deeply regret it. If I could rewind time, I'd make different choices. I'm Zoe, 47 years old. At 32, I married Greg, who was 5 years younger. Our paths first crossed at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, and he was a newly minted medical intern. Despite our differences in age and career, his eagerness to learn from me and his youthful sincerity drew me in. What started as professional exchanges soon evolved into something more. Though I initially hesitated because of our age gap, Greg reassured me that it didn't matter. After 2 years together, we got married, but 4 years into our marriage, everything changed. He began making hurtful remarks, expressing regret over not choosing someone younger. Worse, he shamelessly flirted with the younger nurses at work. I ignored it until I could no longer turn a blind eye. Greg had been having an affair with a former patient, someone 9 years my junior, who was already carrying his child. When confronted, he laughed, justifying his betrayal without a shred of remorse. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. I demanded a divorce and requested alimony, which only enraged him. He thought he should be compensated for putting up with our marriage. His father, instead of holding him accountable, remained indifferent. Since Greg refused to pay, I sought legal help. I had endured enough humiliation and betrayal. This time, I fought back. With a lawyer's assistance, I secured the alimony I rightfully deserved. Once our divorce was finalized, I moved out, breaking our lease, while Greg transferred to a different hospital, leaving behind more insults and a trail of workplace gossip. Eventually, the rumors became unbearable, affecting my mental well-being. I had no choice but to resign. For a while, I drifted, unsure of my next step, but I knew two things: I loved nursing, and I found comfort in staying active. Eventually, I found an opening at a small maternity clinic just a couple of blocks from my home. During my interview, I was welcomed warmly and quickly became part of the team. The clinic, though small, provided a nurturing environment for both patients and staff. Then, one uneventful shift, a pregnant woman arrived for her checkup. When I heard her name, my stomach dropped. It was the same as Greg's mistress. At first, I brushed it off as a coincidence, but when she confirmed her husband's name, Greg, a doctor, I knew the truth. She was my ex-husband's wife. I debated whether to acknowledge our connection but chose to stay silent. Days passed, and I managed to avoid any awkward encounters, that is, until Greg himself showed up with her for an appointment. The moment he saw me, his expression turned to shock. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped. His wife's eyes darted between us, realization dawning. "Wait, is she? Are you here to harass us?" I was stunned. I tried to explain that I had been working at the clinic long before I knew they were patients, but Greg wasn't interested in the truth. Instead, he accused me of stalking them, stirring up trouble. His words, despite being unfounded, earned me wary glances from those around us. His wife, playing into his narrative, feigned distress as if I posed a danger to her and the baby. The attending physician quickly intervened, asking me to step out to calm the situation. Though I understood their need to prioritize the patient, the humiliation cut deep. The last thing I wanted was to be in this situation, misunderstood, judged, and unwelcome. Word of my past divorce spread quickly, and whispers followed me wherever I went. Greg's wife made it a point to make me uncomfortable, openly speaking ill of me, though I knew I had done nothing wrong. I dreaded the months ahead. With her pregnancy still far from term, I questioned whether I could endure the hostility. Despite my fondness for the clinic, I ultimately decided to resign. My supervisor didn't seem surprised. If anything, she looked relieved. That realization stung. Exhausted and disheartened, I lacked the motivation to look for another hospital job. Instead, I returned to my parents' home, where they welcomed me without question. Though they didn't say much, their quiet support meant everything. But as weeks passed, I felt restless, ashamed of doing nothing while relying on them. Eventually, I took a part-time job at a local grocery store. It was my first time working outside of healthcare, and surprisingly, it felt liberating. As much as I had loved nursing, the immense responsibility of caring for patients had weighed on me. Stepping away gave me a much-needed breather. 2 years later, I was still living with my parents when the grocery store offered me a full-time position. It felt good to be recognized for my hard work, so I accepted without hesitation. Over time, I received a few matchmaking proposals, but I turned them all down. I had no interest in marriage at 44. However, one proposal lingered in my mind. My manager insisted that the man in question was also divorced. Understanding my reservations, after much reluctance, I agreed to meet him. When I arrived at the restaurant, my date was already there. The moment he saw me, he shot up so suddenly that his chair crashed to the floor, his face flushed with embarrassment, and despite myself, I chuckled. It was like something out of a novel. I am Quentin, he stammered. Thank you for coming. Smiling, I responded, nice to meet you, I'm Zoe. His nervousness was oddly endearing, and conversation flowed with ease. Quentin admitted that he had visited our store during a business trip and had been drawn to me at first sight. He later discovered that his university senior, who happened to be my department manager, could arrange an introduction. I'm looking for something serious, he admitted, sincerity in his gaze. I had come prepared to turn him down, but for some reason, I found myself wanting to see him again. After 8 months of dating, we decided to get married. My parents, seeing how kind and considerate Quentin was, fully supported our union. Our life together was peaceful and fulfilling. Since we were both older, we hadn't planned on having children, but at 47, my health took an unexpected turn. I wasn't feeling sick, I was pregnant. The thought had never even crossed my mind, especially at my age. I certainly didn't expect my discomfort to be morning sickness, and judging by Quentin's reaction, I suspect he hadn't either. I think I'm pregnant, I told him. He smiled, completely missing the point. That's great. Who's pregnant? Do I know her? He chuckled and pointed at me. Yeah, I'd say you know her pretty well, I replied. Quentin blinked, then stared at my belly, still processing my words. Huh? Wait, you mean, you're pregnant? I nodded. His eyes widened in disbelief before he suddenly scooped me into a hug. Really? We're going to be parents? That's amazing. It felt surreal. I can hardly believe it. It's like a miracle, I whispered. Even though I never once considered not having the baby, I couldn't deny that my age made me nervous. When I visited the hospital, even the doctors asked, "So, what's your plan?" I was well aware of the risks that came with pregnancy at this stage in life, not just for me, but for the baby too. I knew people would question whether we'd even be around by the time our child turned 18. The uncertainty scared me, but one thing was certain, I couldn't bear the thought of ending a life that had already begun. What are you talking about? Quentin said, his voice unwavering. Of course we're having this baby. His immediate response made me feel at ease. I could tell he truly meant it. Still, as time passed, his concern for my health grew. I understood why. He wasn't just my husband, he was my protector. We discussed it at length, but our hearts never wavered. With the guidance of a doctor, we began preparing to welcome our child. Our families were shocked at first, but their worry soon turned into excitement. Given my age, we decided I should give birth at a well-equipped hospital with experienced specialists. The obstetrician in charge was kind and reassuring, which helped ease my worries. Then, during a routine checkup, something unexpected happened. Alongside my usual doctor, an internal medicine specialist had joined the examination, an added precaution due to my age. Quentin was supposed to accompany me that day, but an urgent work matter had come up, so I went in alone. The moment I stepped into the room, I froze. Standing before me in a doctor's coat was Greg, my ex-husband. I could hardly believe it. He took one look at me and let out a sharp laugh. Seriously? A 47-year-old pregnant woman? That's ridiculous. The obstetrician and nurse exchanged uneasy glances, but Greg was oblivious. You have no right to talk to me like that, I snapped. I'm here as a patient, and I don't need your opinion. Greg smirked. A grandma having a baby? That's just disgusting. I clenched my fists. Do you even hear yourself? Pregnant women already have enough anxieties without a so-called doctor spouting insults, and you call yourself a professional? He scoffed. Do you even realize what kind of hospital this is? We cater to celebrities. You don't belong here. I refused to back down. Then maybe you should be the one leaving, Dr. Greg. Gladly, he sneered, motioning toward the door. Good, because there's no way I'd trust a hospital that employs someone like you, I shot back. At that moment, Quentin entered the room. He immediately sensed the tension, his eyes darting between my furious expression, Greg's pale face, and the uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. What's going on? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Before I could answer, Greg tried to brush past him, but Quentin wasn't having it. You insulted my wife, didn't you? His tone had shifted, low, serious, dangerous. Greg stammered, trying to deny it, but Quentin wasn't fooled. You're a doctor, aren't you? How could you speak to a patient like that? What kind of hospital allows this behavior? Just then, The nurse who had left earlier returned with the hospital director, Mr. Carter. I heard enough of what was said here, the director stated, his expression grave. Quentin turned to him. I trusted this hospital because my father recommended it. I didn't realize you had doctors like this working here. I must have made a mistake choosing this place. The director sighed. No, you didn't. Greg isn't one of our doctors. Both Quentin and I blinked in surprise. I just fired him, the director continued. I only hired him as a favor to an old friend. I had no idea he was this kind of person. He won't be stepping foot in this hospital again. Greg turned pale. Wait, what? You heard me, get out, Mr. Carter ordered. The obstetrician took Greg by the arm and escorted him out into the hallway. Once he was gone, the director turned back to us with a deep bow. I sincerely apologize for this incident. Quentin's anger hadn't fully subsided. Be honest with me, did you only fire him because my father donates to this hospital? If not, would you have let him get away with it? The director shook his head. No, Greg had only been here for a week. His father and I were college classmates, and he convinced me to give Greg a chance. But after today, I see I made a huge mistake. Quentin and I exchanged glances. Despite everything, this hospital wasn't at fault, Greg was, and I still trusted my obstetrician. If Greg is gone, I'd like to stay here for my delivery, I decided. Quentin agreed. A few days later, I received an unexpected call. It was Greg. Please, he begged, talk to the director, ask him to take me back. If I lose this job, I'm finished. Apparently, he had burned every bridge. No hospital wanted him anymore. His father had warned that if he got fired again, he'd be cut off completely. Before I could respond, Quentin took the phone from me. If you ever call my wife again, I'll report you for harassment, he warned. Stay away from her forever. Greg never called again. Not long after, I stopped by a convenience store after a hospital visit and saw him working behind the counter. He was crying, muttering about how his wife had left him and taken their child. I felt nothing. I simply turned around and walked out. A year later, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. She was perfect. And Quentin? From the moment he laid eyes on her, he was completely smitten, so much so that I had to remind him she was our daughter, not just his. Our family was finally complete, and we couldn't have been happier.